I have the honor of introducing Dr. Frank Harris III. He is a professor of post-secondary education and the co-director of the Community College Equity Assessment Lab at San Diego State University. In fall 2022, Dr. Harris began his appointment as Associate Dean of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in SDSU's College of Education, and he received the SDSU Alumni Distinguished Faculty Award for the 2021-2022 academic year. Dr. Harris is best known for his expertise in racial inequity and equity in post-secondary education, and has made important contributions to knowledge about college student development and the social construction of gender and race in college contexts. Dr. Harris's scholarship has been published in leading journals for higher education and students affairs research and practice, and his commentary has been sought by high-profile media outlets, including CNN, the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, and the Chronicle of Higher Education. And he is a welcomed friend at SMC. So, Dr. Harris, thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Louis Martinez. This is great to be here. Also a former Samuel High student. I always like to work that into my introduction as well. So it's good to be here. I am delighted to be able to facilitate this discussion about equity in STEM with 5 of our esteemed colleagues who have a lot of expertise in infusing equity into their STEM work. And so grateful for that. So the way that we have set this up is we've prepared some questions in advance. The panelist knows what those questions are. Some are questions that we're going to ask each of our panelists to respond to. And then we have some that are kind of specific to each panelist based on the work that they've done, the fields that they teach in, and so on and so forth. But we'd also like to invite audience members to ask questions as well. And so feel free to use the Q&A function, in Zoom, ask your question. We will we'll pivot to those questions maybe about halfway into our discussion today. If possible, it's not required, but if possible, if you can direct your question to a particular panelist, that would be helpful in kind of helping us know who to ask and making sure we get the question, the response from the right panelist based on what it is you'd like to know. And so without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. And I would like to invite each panelist to share their name, their pronouns, what it is that they teach, and the one thing that they enjoy most about teaching in STEM. And so we'll go in this order. We'll go with Professor Shea first, then Professor Harichi, Professor Hutchison, Professor Fuha, and Professor Raymer in that order. And I'll put it in the chat so don't feel like you have to remember. But Professor Shea, your name, your pronouns, what you teach, and what do you enjoy most about teaching the STEM?
Hi, so I'm Jen Shea. I guess she, her, hers. And what do I enjoy about teaching? Well, what do I teach? I teach general chemistry. I'm also the department chair for physical sciences. So our group consists of chemistry, physics, and engineering. And what do I enjoy about STEM? I enjoy, and maybe this is true of just teaching, I enjoy the light bulb moments. Like I love chemistry because of how it explains things and the inner workings of the macro world and the micro world. But my favorite part is those light bulb moments when students figure something out that they hadn't figured out yet. So I'll pass it along.
All right. Thank you, Professor Shea. All right. Professor Harichi.
Hi, everybody. So this is Hafed Harichi. I'm a faculty at the math department. So I've been at SMC for about 8 years, and I teach a cross-level, a wide variety, of mathematics courses. So what I enjoy about teaching STEM, particularly mathematics, is that mathematics is a science that describes our universe, as its best. So, a part of my duties as an instructor is to prepare students to be individuals in the society that do have a certain level of critical thinking, okay? And to serve later on in the society by contributing in STEM-related fields. So,
right. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Harichi. Professor Hutchinson. And sorry, Professor Hutchinson, you're muted.
I am. Thank you very much.
No
I
worries.
was just going to say that just like Professor Shea, it's those light bulb moments and the realization about their own abilities of how much they can learn and accomplish when many times they've been told they have not. And that's all their own doing. I'm just a little facilitator, and it's amazing how much that they can accomplish and do, and building that confidence in them, I think is the most rewarding for me.
All right. Thank you, Professor Hutchinson. Professor Fuha.
Hi, my name is Novita Pua. My pronouns is she, her, hers, and I teach math as well. Let me see. I enjoy teaching math whenever there's this like aha moments. I like to talk about math through my own way of understanding it, and usually it's what's happening behind the scene. So a lot of my students think that math is a difficult subject, and anytime when I talk about what happens behind the scene and explain to them what leads to that particular concept, they usually tell me, oh wow, I've never thought about it this way before. And so I think I really enjoy that part, and making them realize that math, after all, is not a very difficult subject. It just requires understanding of the foundation knowledge behind it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Pua. And the correct pronunciation of your name is duly noted. Apologies for that.
That's okay. I understand.
All right. Professor Raymer.
Yes.
Yeah, go for it.
Hi. Yeah, I'm I'm Poliana Raymer, she, her. I teach fundamentals of biology, and I also teach applied ecology and conservation biology. I think that for me, what I most enjoy is the transformation that happens with the students that come in and explicitly tell me that they don't like biology. They hate memorizing. They never had a good experience with it. They hated their high school teacher, whatever the case, that like led them to just be very hesitant about biology. And then to see them at the end of the semester just being like, this is actually really fun. So I kind of get a kick out of that when I see that happening, and when I see them like actually enjoying something that they really disliked before. That's like a really fun part for me.
Awesome. Thank you, Professor Raymer.
Yeah.
Now, what I noticed in everyone's response to the first question is that everyone kind of seems to be motivated by this joy and this desire to kind of demystify STEM for your students, to kind of help them know that in some ways there's a scientist within all of us, that they could actually do it, building their confidence, helping them kind of, debunk some of the myths about STEM, and, being able to be successful in STEM. I kind of noticed that demystifying STEM was sort of a recurring theme in everyone's response to the first question. And so my question as a follow-up to that is, how did you all decide to become, scientists, and more specifically, STEM educators? Like, what was the sort of the thing that got you to where you are? And then as a follow-up to that is, what motivated you to become a part of the STEM, the NSF program at SMC? So it's kind of a two-parter there. And anyone could jump in. We'll go in any order with that one. So how did you discover the STEM side, the STEM educator within yourself? And then how did you decide to become a part of NSF?
Can I start first?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so hi everybody again. So this is Hafed Richi. So I mean, my background, like the education that I've had back on what I was born and raised, it kind of what impacted me to choose mathematics as a field. So I was born and raised in North Africa, by the way, okay, in a little country, it's called Tunisia, Oh, yeah. And the educational system there is very French influenced because of the history of the country. They used to be a French colony. And during high school, you have to kind of measure on, you have to choose a field of expertise, which was, either mathematics or literature, like technology. So what inspired me to choose a STEM path, although I used to be very good at literature as much as mathematics is actually very inspiring instructors that I've had. I mean, I still remember, I mean, lots of their presentations and the motivations that they had and the time that they really dedicated on us, you know, to kind of make you not only enjoy the field, learn from it, but also be inspired by the professional, you know, occupation that they were having as instructors. I mean, you're like, wow, I mean, they were amazing on stage. They were very inspiring. I mean, it made me want to be an instructor at a very early stage, which is very unusual. I mean, I often meet students here in the United States that are kind of puzzled. You know, they have a huge interrogation mark about what am I going to do? I'm just taking some general courses, or I'm changing majors. That wasn't the case for me. I know it's very unusual, but I credit this to very inspiring instructors that I've had that made me love the topic. I reached the point, I remember in high school, where I had to make a tough decision between either choosing literature, which I still enjoy till nowadays, and between doing mathematics. And I wished having the option to do both. So that system that I used to belong at, which is a French influence system, till I got my bachelor's degree. Then I came for grad school to the United States. This was like almost 24 years ago. It's a system that you learn a lot from it, but then it puts you on a very narrow, path. So when you become a math major in high school, at the university, you cannot reverse and say, hey, I want to do literature. But I believe I've made the right choice, and I credit it again, to the inspiring professors that I've had, and to the work that they dedicated for us as students at the very early stage. Now, to answer the second part of the question, and why is it that I decided to be a part of the NSF, program? So that came after a 5 years participation that I got involved in as a PI of the MUREP, NC3I, which is the Minority and Underrepresented Research Educational Program of NASA, that I got involved in, collaborating with a wonderful team of faculty from cross departments at Santa Monica College. So I learned about equity throughout my participation in this grant, and then I decided to continue the journey. So the irony here is that I always wished doing NSF first and then doing the grant. So it's kind of on a reversed order that I've had that experience. Yeah, so for me, the grant, and I'll be very happy to share my, my experience on the grant in more detail, with everybody, but the grant was more for me on creating opportunities, for students in STEM, and particularly underrepresented and minorities. The NSF STEM, the NSF equity program, it brought more of a sense of more awareness about why is it that we as faculty should be more involved in equity. Right. So I can talk more about the NSF, but I don't want to kind of dictate. So the NSF, the NSF equity program, for me, the way I reflect on it, it was a training program that I was in cohort 1 that got me engaged with a team of faculty from across departments to learn about equity throughout, for instance, the Quora online training program, throughout reading research papers, throughout also attending presentations that were done by the PI and his team of co-PIs. And then what was wonderful about it is that it created a very safe space, for all of us to share our thoughts and to reflect about the challenges that we individually encountered in our departments, and also that we're encountering within our department. Sometimes, you're like, hey, you're learning about equity, and you kind of, meet certain colleagues that are kind of anti-equity, and that's your role, is on spreading, those ideas and trying to be an ambassador in your department. And what was interesting about it is that once you're done with that training, you have to kind of carry certain tools. It's what I call it, your toolkit. What is it that you learned from this training program? What is it that you're going to embed in your classroom and within your department to help minorities and underrepresented? So this is literally what my little journey is. In equity so far at Santa Monica College, but I'll be happy to provide more details. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Ricci. And then we're gonna, when we get to the questions that we've, that are sort of specific to each panelist, we're gonna ask you specifically about your experience as a PI on the NASA grant that you talked about, as well as being a participant, right? So we're gonna start with that when we circle back to you. But one thing that I was struck about in your response about why did you get what was it that got you involved in NSF cohort? Your exact words were, it provided a safe space to learn about equity. I thought that was pretty powerful. And so I want to ask maybe some of your other colleagues who are also panelists, anyone else kind of had a similar experience in terms of what got you involved in the NSF cohort, where you you seeking a safe space to learn about it, or did you kind of discover that this was a safe space to learn about equity? I would love to hear from some of our other panelists on this. Or
I can
oh,
go.
yeah, go for it. Yeah,
So Vita, do you want to go?
go for it.
Okay, I can go. So I want to talk about briefly about myself. I'm actually a first generation college graduate in my family. So I understand the struggle of walking down a path that no one around me understand, with no support. And I was hoping, that if I meet students, and talk about my experience and influence them, that I can make a difference in their life. And hopefully they can continue to strive forward with their major in STEM. And that's the reason why I joined NSF. I wanted to meet my people. And so I sort of discover that it is a safe place for me to talk about equity approaches that can help my students. But I didn't know that was a safe place before. I just, just wanted to meet my people. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Poir. And to circle back to you a little bit about, how did you end up where you are, right? A little bit about the highlights of your journey in becoming, a professor, a STEM professor specifically.
I'm sorry, say that again. I lost you for a second.
Yeah. So how did you arrive at becoming a STEM professor?
Actually, when I was in college, I met this calculus professor whom I really love, because he was very challenging but very clear, and he was very inspiring. I never knew that I could love a math course that much. It was a calculus course, so I just kind of follow him throughout my entire math courses. I took calculus 1, calculus 2, calculus 3. I literally follow him around just to take his class because it was just so much fun. And I figure, all of these years when I went to college, I didn't have anyone to talk to about like my passion in mathematics. My parents didn't understand that. And he sparked this excitement in me, to learn more about math, to learn about calculus, and how it could help me to improve my understanding in computer science. I was a computer science major back in the days. And then I just felt like he changed my life, when I was in college. I felt like I could relate to him. I felt like I belong. Coming from a small town, I'm a very small town girl. Yeah, we didn't talk a lot about life beyond a woman, usually was destined to be in the kitchen. That's how, I was raised, and I went beyond that, and he made a difference, and I want to make a difference in my students' life as well. Yes.
Oh, thank you so much. Professor Shea, I think we promised to come to you next. Same question.
Sure. So I guess I'll start with my story. It's a meandering one, but I think that's kind of truth for a lot of our students too. In high school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I thought, you know what, pharmacy sounds cool. And I think part of it was, well, pharmacists make a lot of money, could buy a nice car. And I liked science. I had a fantastic chemistry teacher that gave me a B in chemistry. But he was awesome. And so I started at university thinking I'm just going to check off my prereqs and go straight to pharmacy school and skip the bachelor's. It's very ambitious. But then I realized I don't like memorizing things. So Pollyanna, sorry. And pharmacy is a lot about memorizing. And the chemistry classes were exciting for me. And I saw the opportunity for like drug design and treating diseases. And I got wrapped up in the idea of research. So I went to grad school thinking I could get all the answers there and save the world. And I thought I would do research, but then I realized I didn't like research either because there was so many days where things didn't work. And, you know, I had a couple undergrads that worked with me in the lab, and those were my favorite days.
Got it.
So I came to the realization I didn't want to run a lab. I wanted to teach. And I told my PhD advisor, I want to teach. Can we figure out how to like wrap up the PhD, graduate, move on? And boy, oh boy, did that not go well. It was not supportive, but he did live up to the promise of helping me graduate without having to wait 8 years or something like that. And I jumped into teaching wholeheartedly. And it really comes back to those moments of like discovery for the students. So I didn't start out thinking I wanted to be an educator, but I really do love that. And how did I come to join the NSF equity program? There was not much conversation of equity in our department. It was actually something we kind of, I would say, avoided in a lot of ways, because there's a lot of big feelings that come with equity conversations. But on campus, that's the buzzword. Everybody's talking equity. So when my department chair came to me and said, I think you should apply, I reluctantly said, okay. And I say reluctantly because there's so much going on in life with little kids and teaching and everything. But I realized that was my opportunity. And I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, but your observation about the safe space was huge, because I did find a group of people that I could learn and talk to and learn from, where I knew I wasn't going to get judged if I said something wrong, you know? So I'm glad I did it. I'll talk more about, you know, my experiences in later questions, but I think that answers your questions for now.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Professor Shea. Now, Professor Raymer, not to put you on the spot, but I see you in the chat agreeing. So I think maybe this is a good time to circle to you on the same question. How did you
Sure,
get? Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely second that. I feel like I had so many questions and I didn't feel like I had a safe place to ask them without being judged. I feel like, you know, being an instructor, there is this, I don't know, notion that people have of you that like you have the answer to these things, that should be already like embedded in you. So I had basic questions and I felt like just listening to everybody talk, I identified myself with the questions that other people had. And it was just really important for me to be hearing that. I definitely felt that safe space every time we met and every discussion we had. So I do want to second that.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, and last, of course, but certainly not least, Professor Hutchinson. Tell us about, how did you get to where you are, and how did you discover this you know, what appears to be a wonderful learning community of other STEM educators to talk about equity in STEM?
And it really is a wonderful community. I definitely agree with that statement. Well, for me to get here, I was like Professor. Oh, here I go again. I did it again.
No, you're good.
So, first, I do want to second that statement of this being a wonderful, embracing, very safe community. That we were able to learn a lot. I learned a lot from my peers. But the way that I came to even becoming an educator was similar to Dr. Shea, where it was a meandering path. I also thought that I would be a researcher, and it really was life circumstances that was such that my husband at the time was a medical resident. We had our first child. My child didn't even know who his father was because he was working 20-hour days, and it really wasn't feasible for me doing my 18-hour lab days as well to be able to take the responsibility of being a participating parent. So because I was part of a training grant from the NIH, one of the requirements is to do a science service payback. And I could either do more research, which I still loved, or I could potentially go into teaching. And I had two doctoral advisors. One of them said, you know what, Sandra, I can see the passion you have when you work with undergrads and you love it. And I think you should try teaching. And I was like, I don't know. I'm afraid of public speaking. I don't know. But I was able to get a 1-year position at a community college. And that is where I found my passion. I did not find my passion till my early 30s, but this is my dream job, to be in education, where the one thing that I did know was that I wanted to make a footprint in society. And this is a direct way that I can make a contribution in somebody's life, even if it's just a little bit, to be just planting a little seed for them. So it took me a while. SMC was my dream school. I also went to Samuel High. The person who first sparked my love in biology was my AP bio teacher at Samuel High, Mrs. Wexler, and she was a single parent who even managed to get babysitters for her kids to come and make sure that each and every one of us passed the AP bio test. So we came on Saturdays, on her own time, on our own time. And the passion that she had for teaching was something that always kind of was in my college education. I had considered becoming a developmental disability educator. I have a concentration in that. So education was always something that I wanted to delve into. I just didn't know how much I would love it. And the students at our college really inspire me. And the reason why, there's two reasons why I decided to apply, and I was lucky enough to be accepted into this program, was first, most of my students are students of color. I teach anatomy. I probably muted myself when I said that. So I teach anatomy, and these are all students who want to go into the allied health. But we have a very low success rate. And so for me, I wanted to have a resource where I can try to figure out how can I help in their success. You know, since I would say 70–80% are students of color in my classes. The second reason was my daughter. She's actually one of my heroes. She has always been very active in social justice. In high school, she took a number of elective classes, and she started educating me about the importance of how I can make a difference with my students in being able to infuse that into classes. I think my first thing was, well, I don't have time. Anatomy takes so long. I just need to teach the material. But I've realized that there are ways, and I know we're going to talk about it in my specific question on how we can infuse that. So those are the reasons why I decided to do the program.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Quite a story. So there's a couple things I want to do. Like I think now there's one more question that is kind of directed to all the panelists, but maybe we'll ask two or three of you to respond to this one. While we're responding to this question, I want to encourage the audience, if you have specific questions for our panelists, feel free to use the chat or the Q&A to ask them. And then once we get a few responses to this next question I'm going to ask, then we'll circle and see what questions we have from the audience. And so, and again, just maybe two or three of you respond to this question. Why do we as a society, as a group of educators, post-secondary educators to be more specific, why do we struggle to get more racially minoritized students to earn bachelor's degrees in STEM fields, and some of the fields that you all are, represented here? Where's the disconnect there? Yeah, Professor Raymond, there was a hand. Did you want to?
I have a suggestion. I don't feel super confident about it, but I have a suggestion from what I've seen. I don't know. I think the reputation for STEM is that, the courses are very hard and you're required to do so much. And it's so complex and everything. And so I've seen a lot of my students having self-confidence issues, and I think that depending on your background, depending on what you were exposed to, it really like dampens your confidence to go into something with such a reputation. STEM is sort of like labeled as something that's very hard and only like really, really smart people can do it. And so if you're not in that position to believe in yourself, and I've seen some students with full potential not believe in themselves, and I'm just like trying to work with them, but I see that that's, you know, that needs to be worked first and foremost. So I have that, I from what I've observed, it really is this idea of like everything you've been exposed to, every sort of like every experience you've had, things you have to deal with in life, and then reaching this moment of decision and having to face something that's you know, labeled as such. I think a lot of people sort of try to bypass it and go to something that's not labeled as so hard and complex. And you know, I don't know, that's, I guess that's like, again, it's not something I'm like, I've read about this and everything, but it's just that like I see this in my students. I know that there's potential there, but they sometimes they do struggle to believe that they can do it. And I feel like, you know, they'll end up either dropping the class, which it hurts me to see. But when they persist, I know that there's a payoff in the end. But for some of these students, it's just it's more than they can take at the moment. You know, they have to kind of deal with things that are a lot more complex than STEM itself. So I think there's a little bit of that there.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Raymer. Professor Pois.
Oh, hi. I want to echo what Professor Raymer said. Especially, I want to share what my student told me last week. One of my students is struggling to find a place to study, and I asked her what's going on. I mean, we have library on campus, right? And we have public library around the cities. And she mentioned to me, she said, well, I have to be home at certain time because I live in a very shady area. We have a lot of, I live in a high crime rate cities where I may get shot if I walk in the dark. And so I have to be home certain time. And I don't want to be home because I can't study at home. My mom and my stepdad constantly have these arguments and drama. And my mom would make me do all the chores in the house, and I never end up finishing my homework. So I feel like I kind of reflect on that because I'm thinking about my daughter, right? We live in a decent place, you know, in Monterey Park. I participate in my daughter's school activities. I help them with homework and do all that. But this student, she doesn't have that, you know, and I think it's really hard for a student to be successful in STEM field because there are just so many hiccups, right? There are so many challenges, you know, that they have to deal with, not only in the subject itself, because they are lacking in foundation, because they didn't have the time that they can put in, they didn't have the support at home. And let's face it, you know, with the Common Core, there are so many parents who are not equipped to help their children. And so I think that leads to lack of foundation in mathematics. And we need mathematics in order for you know, students to to be successful in STEM field. So all of these, you know, contribute to them choosing like other majors instead of STEM.
So let me, Professor Port, this is, yeah, so sort of just aggregating your response and what Professor Raymer shared, right? It's, you know, so what I'm hearing is that sometimes students lack the efficacy, right? The confidence. They have the potential, but they may not have the confidence for whatever reason, or they may not have access to safe spaces to study, or they may not have the necessary support at home, right? Or, when we see in the chat here that they may lack certain foundational things. Now, putting my equity hat on here, the question I would have is that why would those challenges affect racially or be more salient amongst racially minoritized students than they would be for others? Isn't that something we should expect a critical mass of all students, right, to experience? Why is it more salient with, Black, Latinx, Native American, Pacific Islander, and maybe Southeast Asian students, right? The populations that tend to be racially minoritized. Just curious about that.
I feel that that is a cycle, because if let's say that the parents never went to college, they don't know how to support their children in that way, and they're struggling to make ends meet, and they don't have time to support their own children at home. And I think that is what I have been focusing on. And in my classroom, I often would ask my student, how can I help you?
Yeah.
Like, what kind of assignment that is more efficient for you, that you can get done? Because after all, when we create assignments, we may tend to give a whole bunch of assignments, right, for them to practice, because, well, it's mathematics. You need to practice in order for you to be able to understand it. But can they complete it? So I often ask myself that questions, like to answer your question, it is a cycle. And if we want to break it, we need to help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Professor Horichi, you've been kind of patiently waiting, so I want to invite you to, respond here. Why do we struggle to produce more racially minoritized students with STEM bachelor's degrees?
Yes, so from my perspective, from my personal modest experience, in the academic field, I would address 2 points in this conversation that we're all having here. So part of it is the variability, that we instructors deal with on the struggles that those students are encountering, which is related, it's definitely related to like societal, economical, and historical challenges that they went through. So the more variability in the classroom you have, that is causing those students to lack skills, the more it becomes a little challenging for the instructor to reach out to them, no matter how much time you'd provide, no matter how much flexibility you'd provide. So all this, of course, is going to impact, their academic path along their journey towards earning a bachelor's degree. Now, another factor that I feel it's very important, this is my second point, is what I refer to it as the awareness from both parties, professors and students, about equity practices and about the fact that in order for those students to succeed, you need to kind of really provide for them, the resources for help. So let me explain what that means specifically from the professor's perspective and students. When you're in the academic field as an instructor, suppose that you have a certain level of awareness, of what equity is, and you're incorporating it in the classroom. What you're doing there, you're having a certain percentage of impact. Those students that you're impacting and the represented the minorities, they're going to be taking other classes next semesters. So I feel like equity is more of like a chain work. The more you're having in that chain instructors that are aware of it, the more the institution is providing them resources for the students, the more you're increasing their likelihood, the probability that they would succeed getting into a bachelor, earning their bachelor. The more there are gaps on that chain, the more those students are impacted. Like suppose Professor X has a certain high level of equity, practices in the classroom, This professor is impacting a certain group of minority and underrepresented students who are going to be taking the next 2 or 3 semesters later on, instructors that have zero clue what equity is. They're very rough. They're just on the board for the material. They're very mechanical. So if those students are not having themselves that sense of awareness that they've earned from other instructors that, provided for them a safe learning environment about, hey, we have resources for you. We have, like, for example, in mathematics, like a STEM lab, we have like a math lab, we have like flexible office hours. So if they're not having that kind of awareness at the level of the fact that we're there for them, that they're going to deviate. They're like, hey, okay, I had this instructor who's, flexible, who's providing me this. No, I'm dealing with, along the journey with certain challenges where I feel I'm lost, I'm not here, and I'm struggling. So I think it's all related to, you know, like how much do we provide for them, and also like that awareness that I addressed, I mean, here from both parties, from instructors, which would impact, I mean, the students themselves and make them develop a certain sense of awareness. And let me give you an example of what I mean by students' awareness. I mean, you all hear the stories about students that struggled in their journey. Okay, they did not have enough resources, but what made them keep on and on and on is the fact that they believed they could make it. So let me address this. Here, I'm not talking about students that found several resources. Okay, I mean, I myself, as an undergraduate student, I was born and raised, as stated earlier, I mean, in North Africa, and I was subject to an educational system which I'm grateful for, I'm thankful for, but I can assure you that it has zero flexibility, zero almost, I mean, equity practices. I don't remember even approaching an instructor during their office hours for help. It's like you feel as if you're bothering them. They were very centered about the research. But what kept me on is my passion for mathematics. And I credit that to those who taught me in high school and some who taught me in the university. They were, you know, they give me kind of that attention. Okay, they're like, hey, you could make it, or go and grab this book, or go and, you know, try to read about this and that. So it's like that little hope that builds up, that developed on me as a student a certain sense of awareness that you could make it. So I think, I mean, these are among the factors that I believe, I mean, in general, that they could have a severe, I mean, impact on whether a student would be able to make it towards getting a bachelor's degree or not, I mean, along the journey. So it's that variability. How do you, I mean, as an instructor, how do you deal with a huge wide spectrum of variability of struggles that your students in the classroom are encountering? Like it could be, for example, economical. It could be, for example, racial. It could be, for example, related to certain, like, for example, it could be like related to certain backgrounds also, you know, from history, where, you know, certain, you know, groups have been marginalized and so on. Like, how do you address that? So sometimes, I mean, no matter how much you put into that, the impact, it may not be that big if there is no kind of this sense of awareness in the chain, like from those, you know, I believe in the sense of the community, you know, among faculty. The more you have faculty that are having that sense of awareness of equity, and they're really incorporating it, the more you're increasing the likelihood that those students, you know, that are struggling will make it towards getting a bachelor's degree. So these are just the 2 points that I wanted to address.
Yeah, very, very insightful. You know, as your response, Professor Arichi, kind of got me thinking about, I don't want to call it a theory. That's kind of giving what I'm going to say more credit than it deserves. But we've always had this hypothesis, so to speak, that if we do a really good job in some of those early classes, right? Like, you know, I think we tend to call them gateway classes, right? The early classes, the early STEM classes, the early math classes, right? And faculty would often say to us, hey, if I'm providing all this support early on, what's going to happen when they transfer to UCLA or USC or, you know, San Diego State for that matter, where you're going to have professors who don't know about equity, who don't care about it, who's not going to give them the same level of support. And we would often say, if we do a good job of providing support and building efficacy, building confidence, and giving students the skills to sort of navigate and strategize these pathways early on, by the time they transfer, when they get to a more challenging context, they would already kind of be in STEM shape, right? So they'll be ready to encounter more challenging situations, more challenging contexts. They'll have, you know, the interpersonal and the problem solving skills that they'll need to engage with a professor who may be less equity focused, and so on and so forth, right? And sort of, in some ways, that's kind of what I'm hearing you say, right? Is that we know that when a student comes to SMC, there's going to be a wide range in terms of, you know, what, you know, the level of efficacy, the level of preparedness, right? It's going to be a huge range, right? And so making sure that we're really equity focused early on in that first semester, even that first year, if we can really kind of hone in and do a good job there, then we can get them to these, you know, upper division, transfer, and even graduate school, perhaps. But we don't, you know, I don't know that we often think about this sort of, you know, how do we build momentum in some of these early courses where we tend to lose, where there tends to be a lot of attrition. right? Pretty early on. I remember, when I was working at USC in student services, we called it student affairs. We would have students, students of color, actually students who were, very well prepared, right? Had really, really good preparation. But most of the students who came in majoring in a STEM field and who decided to transfer, it usually happened within the first year. And so we knew if we can get them, get them to build community and get them through the first year, get them to their sophomore year, they'll usually graduate, right, in a STEM degree. And so what you're saying kind of in some ways reminded me of some things that we've always kind of theorized, about, how to address, this leaky pipeline and this leaky pathway. All right. So let's circle to some of the more, thank the three of you for responding to what I know is a very challenging and kind of complex question. We could probably have spent the whole panel just on that question. But let me circle back to Professor Shea. So Professor Shea, you are the chair of the physical sciences department. And any of us who has worked in higher education, right, particularly as faculty, we know that being a department chair is probably the hardest job on campus, right? Because you have this responsibility, right? As you're responsible for the department, but you don't always have the authority that you need to kind of make your faculty colleagues do certain things or buy in certain ways, right? And so my question for you is, as the chair of your department, how do you encourage or support your colleagues, your other faculty in your department to approach their teaching from an equity-minded perspective? How do you encourage them to kind of buy into equity and to take this, more seriously and to kind of rethink the whole way that they approach their teaching through the lens of equity?
Right. So I think something you said in your question really underscores the situation of, as chair, you don't really have any authority to make anybody do anything.
Right.
So it's all about buy-in.
Right.
So I started as chair in June. So I've been only doing it for a couple months. So my involvement with equity in the department we haven't gone very far yet, right? And as I mentioned in a previous response, equity in our department has been something that's always been kind of like, you gotta stay away from it because there are so many big feelings and big emotions. And so one of the things coming into it after doing the NSF program, and we also had another program on campus, I'm like, we need to start having these conversations. And I think that's the key, is we have to start with conversations. There's about 6 or 8 full-time faculty that have done either the NSF program or the EGC program that we have on campus. And we are putting practices in place in our classrooms. And I think kind of the next step is to really share what we have been doing and help others understand what it means to do equity practices.
Yeah.
Part of that conversation is normalizing the word equity, because in and of itself, that can be a very triggering word for some people. And so my goal is to start having those conversations, to start small, to start slow. But at the end of the day, it's not about making people do things, because there's a critical component of authenticity.
Yeah.
The students know if you are not being authentic.
Yeah.
And my flavor of equity and what I bring to my classroom is different from the colleague in the office next door. But that's because of the authenticity that we bring with the work that we're doing. And so my goal, for as long as I'm chair, is not necessarily to force everybody, but to start bringing awareness and slowly start working towards everybody coming around to the idea, but also recognizing everybody's going to be at a different place on that journey. That's a word that was used a lot when we met with Kirsten and Kieran. is it's a journey, and it truly is a journey. And I'm hoping to bring everybody with me. That's the goal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really appreciate your response because, one of the hardest things that I've had to do, and it's taken me years to learn this, right? As someone who supports institutions and trying to institutionalize equity, is this whole concept of kind of meeting folks where they are and trying to give people the grace and the space that they need to kind of grow. Because as you said, anyone, I mean, you didn't say this, but I'm kind of paraphrasing. It's not enough to just say, hey, here's a list of equity strategies. Do this in your classroom, right? You can try to do equity practices or equity strategies from a deficit perspective, and you're not going to get the results that you want, right? In some ways, students are going to experience that as patronizing, as inauthentic, and you're going to do more to kind of probably turn students off than you would otherwise, right? And so I think one of the most important things that we can do as equity champions, right, is folks who've kind of maybe further along in our journey and recognizing we all still have, more distance to go. It's kind of figuring out how do we identify where, hey, this is where Frank is, right? And I know I would love Frank to be here, but if I can get Frank to commit to even looking at his success rates in his course in a disaggregated way, right? That maybe I would like him to do more, be further along, but if that's where he's at, then I got to meet him where he's at and then figure out how do I get him to go from there, right? That is, I think, one of the more challenging things to do because it's, I'm sure as a department chair at times, you feel a sense of frustration when you know that, this colleague can be doing more. This colleague has so much potential. This colleague is not providing what I think students could really needs to benefit from what they have to offer. That can be incredibly frustrating, but they are where they are, right? And kind of figuring out how do we not give up on them? How do we continue to support them? How do we continue to encourage them? And how do we even celebrate the small wins with them, right? Could be kind of hard. But I appreciate your response, and I don't envy your role as a department chair, to be quite honest. But we need colleagues like you serving in these important roles. Professor Hutchinson, my question for you. One equity-centered teaching innovation, something that you develop, something that you discover, like, hey, this assignment or this practice or this thing seems to really work well with my students, right? What is it, and how did you come up with it?
All right, so it's not one thing, but it's the idea of hit them fast and hit them hard with addressing important aspects of medicine and how it relates to social justice, why what they're learning can be translated for society. So, first day, have them talk about their pronouns in front of everybody so that we can all know what they want to do or how they want to be addressed, myself included. And then first lab assignment on the very first day, we talk about informed consent and the systemic racism that happened with HeLa cells, because we from Henrietta Lacks, who because we're doing microscopes and we're looking at slides. So I have them learn how to use the microscopes, then we look at cells, and then talk about the most commonly used cell and how it's impacted, but where it came from. So we talk about that. First week assignment, getting to know you. I want to know who they are. I want to know what they need my help with. I ask them what I should know about them and where they're feeling like they're going to need support, and just even learn about some of their backgrounds. And then first week journal assignment, where I have them talk about how what they've learned in the classroom can translate to their own personal lives. Like if we're learning about cells, or we talked about Henrietta Lacks, do they have any kind of personal experience that's there? And so and then even that first journal assignment. Part of it, one of the assignments is to go through 7 small videos on microaggressions. And you know, sometimes it's hard to introduce that because they're like, why do we need to talk about this on the first day of class in an anatomy class? And I say, you know what, this is important because you are going to be serving patients who need you. You also have loved ones that can be affected by this. So let's figure out what microaggressions are. Have you experienced it? What would you do in those situations? And because these journals are just a conversation between myself and the individual student, I provide a safe space to be able to have that, and I always respond to what they're saying. I do this then continuously throughout the semester, wherever, like a lot of labs or a lot of these journals, we talk about racial inequity, how there's marginalization in medical care, how people are not, you know, anatomy students, medical students, residents are not educated in differences in how, for example, pigmentation can affect dermatological issues and how that looks different and how there's not been treatment. And that even went into the COVID situation where pulse oximeter is looking at how much oxygen that patients were getting are just not as how should I say? It looks like that people of color have lower or higher levels of oxygenation compared to people, white people, and how they've been misdiagnosed. So we carry this through. We have conversations, and even some of my students, even students of color, say, "Why do we have to talk about this?" And I say, because this is you know, something that you're going to experience, and even if it's uncomfortable, it's uncomfortable for me too. But without talking about it, we can't just brush it under the rug. We need to know what the issues are so that you can best help your future patients. So it's just the hitting fast, hitting hard.
Yeah, and so the two things really stood out to me. First, that you approach it from a lens of cultural humility, right? And you tell students, hey, this is not easy for me either, right? I'm learning this with you, but it's important that we all learn it and we persist through the discomfort, right? Is one thing that I heard. The other thing that I heard a lot of is that it sounds like you work really hard to contextualize the concepts and the things that they're learning, right? To try to make it culturally relevant, right? So you can teach anatomy in a very acultural kind of way, which is a decision. You know, that's an intentional decision. Or you can make an intentional decision to talk about, hey, we're going to learn about anatomy, but we're also going to learn about how does it show up, or how has it, or how might it show up in your daily lives, either as a scientist, right, a physician, or maybe even as, you know, as sort of a patient or someone who's kind of being served in this context. Those are sort of the two big things I heard. Is that sort of
That is it
reflect?
too.
Yeah.
And I don't want to just, you know, people to think that I'm only focusing on you know, inequities. I do just like Professor was going to talk about some of the inspiring people that people may not know. And I actually have students who have them research somebody that's just, you know, like them in terms of the field that they want to go into. And frankly, just like you said, Dr. Harris, I learn a lot. I've learned about a lot of scientists. I've learned more about some of the people who have perpetuated some of the racial inequities that are still in medicine. So, and I tell them, thank you for teaching me. So it is a journey, and then I think they see the relevance as well. So I'm hoping they do.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and you mentioned the scientist spotlight, which after I asked Professor Raymer to respond to the question we prepared for her, I'm going to ask Professor Poir to kind of talk to us about the scientist spotlight as well, which I think you've kind of previewed for us. So I appreciate that. Professor Raymer, you teach in the life sciences.
Yes.
And one thing that I have heard, and I don't know if this is true or not, and would love for you to, you know, either confirm it or debunk this myth, is that, you know, because life science is very experiential, that it tends to appeal to, I mean, all STEM tends to be experiential, but some more than others, right? But that it has a certain appeal to diverse learners, right? Because diverse learners tend to kind of thrive in experiential learning situations. By experiential, we mean kind of the learning that happens outside of the textbook, outside of the lecture, when they're actually practicing and learning and kind of taking what they're learning and observing it in the real world. Have you found that to be the case, particularly with, you know, your diverse students? And if so, how do you kind of, are there some intentional things that you do to try to, you know, leverage that opportunity?
Absolutely. So I one thing that I do try for sure is to move away first from the memorization that I know comes from the kind of the biology background that a lot of people bring in to our class. And yes, there's memorization for sure, but the experiential learning definitely, I feel like it evens out the playing field for everybody, because when you're out there in the field, it feels like, you know, everybody's being exposed to the same thing, and it's just, you know, like the texture and the smell and what we see is just like, it's just so beyond our textbook. And that's, I think, where the passion is found for a lot of people. I asked Savannah if I could, and I asked for permission from my students, but I separated like some photos that I took of them, and they just like, this is really my favorite part, is to just kind of come out and bring, you know, things that they really like. Overcoming fear is something that, like, you know, I have students who have never like touched a scorpion or a snake or a tarantula, and then all of a sudden they like, I have students calling their parents on FaceTime to like show them overcoming that fear. Or, you know, or this is like us going out to measure some trees. Our urban forest is something that's taking up CO2 from the atmosphere and mitigating climate change. And so it's this idea of like approaching the solution versus just like, you know, burying ourselves in eco-anxiety and just the doomism of the world of today. And so just going out there and like, oh, this is part of the solution. We, you know, the reforestation, the everything, and we can all be part of this. We can all pitch in as students and as researchers to find solutions to these problems that are just, you know, so concerning to everyone. So it really, everyone is exposed to this equally, and you are put in a position where you can do something about it, and it really is empowering to everyone. So this is us at the park. We apply it to what's called allometric equations to find the volume of the tree, and we talk about carbon sequestration. It's really great. I take students on hikes. Some students have never been on hikes before. And this is really eye-opening for all of them. It's just so inspiring. I purposely take them the day before the final week starts, and it really is something that helps them sort of like kind of unwind for those 2 hours, and it really brings people together. It's such a great bonding experience. Students who have never had the opportunity to, because maybe they don't have a car or whatever the case, but everybody, we all kind of, with carpooling and whatever, we all find ourselves at Will Rogers. And it's, to a lot of people, this is like the first time they're out in nature. This is the first time they're actually experiencing this. And I love seeing that in them, like that transformation that they have. We do beach cleanup, and we talk about, you know, waste and how we can be better citizens by collecting, you know, waste every time we go. We talk about plastic pollution in our bodies. So like the nanoplastic, the microplastic, also microplastic in the ocean is one of the biggest issues that we have today. And again, it's being part of the solution that really empowers them to a degree that they never thought possible. They never thought that they could contribute to social justice, to environmental justice, to something that's bigger than they are. And I love to experience that with them. And the same at the greenhouse. This is us at Malibu Lagoon State Beach. Last semester, because we go tide pooling to look at biodiversity, we don't set the time ourselves. We have to follow the calendar, the tide pool calendar. So last semester we met there at 5:30 in the morning. And I had a student come up to me and he said, "Professor, I'm going to be honest with you. When I woke up at 4:30, I was like, there was no way I'm getting out of bed and I'm going to make it there." But he's like, "But I'm here and this is beautiful and I love being here and this is great. And thank you for like allowing us to be here." And it's so fun to see that the fact that they are exposed to so much, and it's all, you know, everybody working together. It's just one of the best things that I can experience as an instructor. So I'm really honored to have this opportunity with my students. I'll stop the sharing. I think I reached the end. Yeah, there you go.
Thank you for these pictures are it's great to see it. Now, what I also think I saw, and correct me if I'm wrong, it looked like you had a lot of students working together, right? Like there's a lot of collaboration.
Yes, these are all team-based assignments. Absolutely.
It also reminds me, it might be Dr. Brewster. Dr. Brewster, if I'm giving you credit for something that I shouldn't, please correct me. But I think it was an SMC professor who told me they were teaching like a forensic anthropology class, and the whole class was sort of preparing students to process a crime scene. And so they're learning stuff throughout the semester about, you know, forensics and the things you got to do to process a crime scene. And kind of at the end of the semester, they actually have to process not a real crime scene, but, you know, a crime scene that's been staged, but it's, you know, it's very realistic. The campus police have to be involved, so they know. Was that you, Professor Bruce, or am I giving you credit?
Yeah.
Making that up? I'm not, right?
Yeah. You're not making it up.
Okay, I thought so.
Really,
I know you're not on the panel, but it just sort of reminded me of like the power of experiential learning and how in some ways, and I think Professor Raymer, you kind of noted to this, it equitizes STEM in some ways, because it kind of allows, what I think it does, and I might be wrong, is it allows students to activate other learning strengths that you may not have by just, you know, working in, you know, from a textbook, or, you know, responding to questions on an exam, right? Or when you experience something, right? It's one thing to read it and hear it, but to experience it is another way to reinforce learning in a way that can allow you to demonstrate that you know something. And so I know it sounds like an incredible amount of work on the part of the faculty to set these learning experiences up. But I think one thing we know is that about equity is that it is, you know, to be equity centered in your teaching, it does kind of require, you know, a greater level of work and involvement, but the payoff, especially for student success, certainly can make it worth it. All right, let me stop there. Professor Poir, we kind of hinted at this earlier, but the question I have for you is, you talked about the scientist spotlights as one of the equity-centered strategies that you use on a regular basis in your class, your math class. Can you tell me a little bit about this, and how do you find that it's impacting the success of diverse learners in math?
I do want to share that I teach pre-calculus course and elementary statistic, and I use my scientist spotlight mostly in my pre-cal courses. And I started off with being confused in the when I was trying to design my assignment, because I wasn't sure how I was going to approach designing this assignment, particularly for my students, because I've seen how amazing other instructors, you know, have designed theirs. But I want to do something that I am comfortable with, that is authentic to myself. And my NSF coach, Kieran, and another coach, Kristen Louis Martinez, they helped me figure out that we don't have to do things the way other people are doing it. And I can create an assignment that is authentic to myself. And so I provide like a couple of scientists, a list of very diverse scientists to choose from for my students to write about. And I also provide a link for my student to access where they can research other scientists if they don't want to write about the ones that I recommended. And I get a lot of great feedbacks from my students, mainly because I asked them to talk about how the scientists inspire them and how it relates to their major or whatnot, you know. It could be something that relate to their hobby, right? And I asked them to give me a feedback on the assignment. And one of the students mentioned that she was surprised that there are many Latina scientists out there. And I put a smile on my face because goal number 1, achieve. Yes. And a couple of other students, maybe let me read their comments. There's one, they said, all of these is even more interesting given that Turing was later prosecuted for his homosexuality, rendering many of his contributions to the war effort meaningless in the eyes of the British government after the fact. So I think the fact that they were able to comfortably write that part to me, it allowed them to find someone that they can relate to. And then there's another comment. I realized that most of the things that I like to do will require a stronger math background, which is why I'm currently in this course and planning to take calculus next. Math is the basis for so many of the applied engineering and computer science work I hope to do in the future. And one of the things I know for sure is that I hope to have a similar level of impact as Alan Turing. And so I feel like I didn't even put Alan Turing on my list of scientists, but they went ahead and researched about this particular scientist. And I'm really happy reading their reflection and comment and feedback. And there's another student here. They wrote that this was a major break for them from mathematics, because math can be very taxing, doing so much assignment and studying a lot, right? And they said that this was a nice break because they never actually thought about their major, and they decided that they want to change their major. That was initially not my goal. I didn't mean to cause any turmoil, but I guess it was a good thing too. And then there was another student mentioned that her mom is a single parent, and she never had anyone to talk about career choices, and she didn't ever have any time to think about it. And so she said that some students may not have the proper outlet to be able to come to a decision on their own and may need a little more guidance, and assignment like this can really help them with I think it's missing something here to get the ball rolling. So I feel like my assignment on Scientist Spotlights have checked all of the goals that I put in, because I wanted the students to take a look at all the different scientists out there that who they can relate to. I also wanted them to have time to think about their major, because sometimes, we may choose certain STEM major and we think that that's for us because other people are doing it. But I didn't have time to think about those things. So I want students to be able to think about their career choices, and other potential career choices out there that may spark their interest. And so it checked all the marks for me, and it's been very, very successful. I'm happy to report. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Pua. One of the equity-centered strategies that we often talk about is that it's important for students to see themselves and their salient identities reflected in what they're learning, right? That's another one of the, when we talk about, how do you infuse equity and cultural relevancy into any type of learning, but particularly STEM. And it seems like the Scientist Spotlight kind of helps students do that, right? You talked about students saying, hey, I share some similar lived experiences as the scientist that I searched up, or I didn't realize that someone, in some way, I'm paraphrasing here, someone who looks like me or shares my identities made these important contributions to the sciences. Maybe that means I can, or, family members can too. And so it seemed like it was that you've kind of leveraged that, right, as an opportunity to get more engagement and to do something that you talked about earlier, in our conversation to really build efficacy and confidence, right? When we see someone who we identify with doing something difficult and challenging, then we're probably more likely to say, hey, if they can do it, I can, maybe that means that I can do it too, right? Which I think it can be really powerful. All right, Professor Harichi. So when we started, you kind of talked a little bit about your involvement as a principal and guest investigator in a STEM focused grant, right?
Yes.
Now we don't often think about research, specifically grant funded research, as kind of potentially having a connection to helping us teach our disproportionately impacted students and helping them be more successful in STEM. And so my question to you is maybe, how is being involved in that project as a principal investigator helped you be a better STEM educator for your students?
Okay, so my involvement in the grant that I participated at as a PI at Santa Monica College for about 5 years. So the grant's name is called the MUREP MC3I. It stands for the Minority Underrepresented Educational Program that was offered by NASA. It involved collaborating with a team of faculty from across departments, from physics and engineering, from computer science, from earth science, and myself representing the math department. The main goal of the grant is to create programs that are on campus and off campus, and I'll talk about them, to increase students' interest in pursuing a STEM path, and particularly here underrepresented and minorities. I mean, we targeted that population among our students. So among the things that we created, it was, classes, like for instance, like engineering classes, like we created for our engineering department, the computer science, and we worked on creating internship opportunities. I mean, for almost like a 4-year period at UCLA, USC, and at Caltech. And I was very, blessed, to have a wonderful team of proactive faculty where we had, continuous meetings. Like we had very frequent meetings while we're coordinating on how we're going to place our students. So we had openings, we received applications. We ended up selecting students that were underrepresented and minorities, and we placed them at those internship programs. So one wonders here, what would somebody learn from this? I would summarize it by saying that the importance of creating opportunities for those underrepresented and minorities and giving them the hope that they could belong to STEM, research-oriented programs, to inspire them, to kind of, put them on a certain path where they're like, hey, you know what, I've been doing this research at UCLA, or I joined this group of this professor at Caltech. So we had successive opportunities that were offered each semester. Like we would have an opening, we get a group of students, we place a group, at one of those institutions like UCLA, Caltech, USC. And then what we do, we're monitoring, the progress that they were doing, and then we're inviting them to participate on panels, okay? So where we get their feedback to see if the environment that they were at was kind of a good, safe, learning, scientific environment for them. Are they more enthusiastic about pursuing a STEM path or not? The outcomes of the grant, I would say that they were very successful, okay, based on the analysis that was done by our internal research institute at Santa Monica College, and also throughout Cobblestone. So here I'm trying to reflect on the data. What I learned from it is the importance of those opportunities. And that's one of the practices that I carried with me. To nowadays, as a math faculty, each time I receive, for example, an email from the department chair, or even an email sent by some, other faculty colleague about, hey, there is this internship opportunity, I would post it on my Canvas shell, I would announce it in class, I would highly encourage students to apply for it, and I would remind them always about the deadlines. That experience, it motivated me to further continue my STEM learning journey, okay? So my journey, it started kind of backwards. It's very interesting that I wished having the NSF training program that developed on me that awareness about the importance of equity, and then be a PI. But then when I got engaged in this grant, that's when you're really on the playground. That's when you're like, okay, what is it that I can do to help those students? What is it that we can, incorporate and add to their learning journey? Part of it is also like the background that I come from. Where, as I stated earlier, I was raised on a educational system, and back home where there isn't a lot of opportunities for students back there, at that time period. So when you're starving for those opportunities and you have that sense of awareness, then you're there trying to make the impact. Now, the NSF grant, it's helped me, I mean, learn more about equity. So among the practices that I've carried with me from that training is to equitize the language, I mean, in my syllabus. I've never had a rough language, by the way, but I worked on enhancing that. I mean, as we all know, mathematics is a tough subject. You don't want to have a syllabus whose language is pretty rough from day one to kind of deviate students and push them away. So that's one of those things. So I've enhanced the content of my syllabus. I equitized it. I also, surveyed students. So throughout the help of, the PI of the grant, Kieran, and also like my coach, Tram Dang, I was motivated to kind of create surveys to get students' feedback and see what their struggle is and see how is it that I could enhance, their learning, experience. So I created a trilogy, like a three types of surveys. One early semester, kind of create a safe learning, welcoming environment for them to see if they've encountered previously before taking my class, any issues, any problems, do they have any requests, any special kind of accommodations that they want me to incorporate. The mid-semester survey, it serves more to reflect on how is the learning journey so far for them. Are they finding their balance? Okay, is there anything I could add to help them solidify their learning experience? Then the last one, which is the end of the semester survey, it serves more for them to reflect and gives me their feedback, not only about what's been offered in the classroom, but also on the department level and the institutional level. Like, is there anything that the department should do to help them? Like, for example, I don't know, increasing more, like workshop sessions, like providing more like tutors. And then the institution, what is it that could help them? I also do scientist spotlight. I found them to be very helpful at the developmental level. So what I do usually, I would select a group of scientists of colors. I let them do readings and reflect on them because these are very inspiring. The goal behind them is to motivate them, to inspire them. And as you stated, yourself, Dr. Harris, is like to kind of relate to somebody. They're like, hey, this scientist, struggled in their journey and their path, and they made it, I could make it. I think that's pretty much it. For what I've, from my modest, journey with equity at SMC. I look forward to hopefully participating in more programs, okay, and learn from faculty colleagues.
So, Professor Harichi, let me ask you
Yes,
this.
please.
And if you could just maybe in a minute or so, a minute or less, because I want to make sure we get a chance to ask one more question.
Yes.
Our panelists can answer. But just really quickly, if you have colleagues here who say, hey, I want to get involved in a grant-funded project, whether it's NSF or NSF, but I don't really know how to do it or where to start. What's the quick advice you can give them to kind of get going?
Absolutely, yeah. So I think the first step towards getting into making a grant proposal and having an awareness of what it means to be involved in a grant is to talk to a fellow colleague who participated on a grant or like who was involved in a grant. I know that grants, they have different goals, different agendas, but at least it kind of gives some information and awareness of what it means to be involved in a grant. We also do have at Santa Monica College a dean. So I don't know who's this new dean who's involved with, helping to write grant proposals and also to provide information for any faculty who's interested in writing grant about what are the needs of the college. Like, what Santa Monica College needs in equity, it might be different from what an East Coast college needs for equity because of the variability of the population that we're dealing with and students' needs. So I think the first thing is to approach a faculty, probably more than a faculty, to get some of their feedback about how their journey was, what it means to be involved on a grant. And also like to reach out to some of the administrators that we have, okay, to help us, write a good proposal and to kind of help us have, I would say, the basics, the foundation for what's going to lie, on the top of, like, in terms of incorporating the main important components of the grant. What is it that we need at the college, okay, to help hopefully this proposal of the grant that's going to be submitted get accepted? Because you don't want to be writing a proposal that does not fit what you need in your college, okay? Yeah.
So what I heard is learn from folks who've done it successfully.
Yes.
Outreach to the folks on your campus who manage grants,
yes,
and then figure out how do you align the grant needs with the college's needs. That's kind of
absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
So we have 5 minutes left. And we have 4 panelists remaining. Professor Shea had to go and teach. So I'm going to ask each panelist, try to answer this question and say, let's say a half a minute or less. What else do you want our audience to know about equity in STEM? Like the one thing you want them to take away as we conclude. And let's go with Professor Raymer, Hutchinson, Pois, and then Harichi in that order. The one thing, you know, your sort of 30-second takeaway as we conclude about equity in STEM.
Okay. From what I've learned from the conversations we've had, one of the things that really sticks out to me is the idea of individual attention, of personalizing your connection with your students, knowing them as a human being and not sort of like part of a clump of students coming into your class. I think that that has all the tools sort of embedded in that, the attention, the confidence building, the opportunity building, everything that we've talked about comes with giving your student the personal attention that they need. So I think that would be my main takeaway.
Awesome. Thank you. Professor Hutchinson, your 30-second takeaway as we conclude.
I think my takeaway is that authenticity is important. Work within what you're comfortable with, but don't be afraid to stretch out your own knowledge and to be uncomfortable and to figure out where you fit in and where your students fit in.
Okay. Thank you. Professor Pois.
I think my main takeaway is that I oftentimes think that one person cannot make a huge difference, but I like to say that one person can make a difference, because once you infect the department with your view in equity, it can spread. And I think I have started with a couple instructors.
Okay, thank you. Professor Harichi, take us home in 30 seconds.
Yeah, so I mean, for me, it's more of what I refer to it as equity being a journey. Okay, so and that journey, it's a continuous learning. It's continuous sense of awareness. It's like, you know, you're participating in that whole journey by not only learning, but also impacting other faculty, creating a sense of community, trying to learn more about resources and more equity, I would say, focused practices. Read, try to participate, you know, on events like such as this one. I mean, to share other, you know, thoughts from other faculty colleagues, and try to positively impact. So this is, yeah, what I'm taking from this.
All right. Well, thank you. You all were fantastic. It was a very humbling privilege to be able to facilitate this conversation. I learned some things, right? And I'm hoping everyone walks away with at least one new idea, one new strategy, or one new question that they want to ask, right? As you sort of continue to do this work. So, you know, thank you also for Professor Christian and Silvana, who had to take off earlier, for your work and kind of helping me prepare for this. But this is a good way to end what I know was probably a pretty long week for everybody. I'll just say that. So thank you all so much.